My 67th birthday cake had just reached the table when my daughter-in-law, Jennifer, slid a cream envelope beside my plate. "Before you start making plans with your money," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "we need to settle what you owe this family." Inside was a bill for $1,460. Christmas dinners, rides to appointments, groceries, visits after my husband died, and one line that made my hands go cold: emotional support, 126 hours. I looked at my son, Michael. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Then our waiter, Tyler, glanced at the bottom of the document and froze. "Mrs. Thomas, did you authorize this?" Jennifer immediately interrupted him. Tyler said nothing more. He walked away, pulled out his phone, and called someone. I had no idea that call was about to change everything. If you were sitting in my chair, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. And if stories about family betrayal, dignity, and second chances speak to you, please like and subscribe. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. 6 years before my daughter-in-law placed that ridiculous bill beside my birthday cake, I was sitting in a hospital room holding my husband's hand and trying to understand how 42 years of marriage could end in a single afternoon. George had always seemed indestructible to me. How a 68 still walked 3 miles every morning, still insisted on mowing our lawn himself, and still complained whenever I tried to replace anything in the house that had at least another 10 good years left in it. Then one Tuesday morning, he felt a crushing pain in his chest. By sunset, he was gone. There are losses you cry over, and then there are losses that rearrange the entire shape of your life. George's death did that to me. For the first few months, I moved through our house like a visitor. His coffee mug was still in the cabinet. His gardening gloves were still on the shelf in the garage. His reading glasses sat beside the recliner where he used to fall asleep watching the evening news. I was 61 years old, recently retired from my job as an elementary school librarian, and suddenly, every room felt too quiet. That was when Michael stepped in. My only son called every morning before work. "Did you sleep okay, Mom?" Most days I lied. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm fine." He knew I wasn't. Sometimes he came over after work just to sit with me. He would change a light bulb I could have changed myself, or take the trash bins to the curb, as though those small things might somehow fill the hole his father had left behind. Jennifer was attentive too. At least she was then. She brought casseroles, chicken soup, fresh bread, and more containers of pasta than one widow could possibly eat. "You shouldn't have to think about cooking right now," she told me. Emily was 10 at the time. She would curl up beside me on the couch and talk about school, her friends, and whatever book she was reading. Sometimes she slept over. On the worst nights, I would hear her breathing peacefully in the guest room and feel less alone. I remember thinking that although I had lost George, I had not lost my family. That thought carried me through the first year, and perhaps that was why I became so willing to help whenever Michael needed something. George and I had never been wealthy in the glamorous sense. We didn't own luxury cars. We rarely flew first class. We didn't belong to a country club. But we had been careful. George worked for decades in corporate finance, and I had spent more than 30 years in public education. We paid off our primary home before retirement. We saved consistently. We carried little debt. George had one rule about money: freedom matters more than appearances. At the time, I thought Michael had learned that lesson too. About 14 months after George died, Michael called me one evening. His voice sounded embarrassed. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He explained that he had underestimated a tax obligation connected to one of his work bonuses. He was short by several $1,000s. He hated asking, or at least he sounded like he did. "I can repay you over the next few months?" he said quickly. I didn't hesitate. "How much do you need?" "Need 3,000. I transferred the money the next morning. Michael thanked me repeatedly. Jennifer even sent flowers. The card said, "We don't know what we would do without you." I kept that card for years. The repayment never came. But I didn't ask. He was my son. A few months later, Jennifer called about Emily. There was an academic enrichment program she wanted Emily to join. And according to Jennifer, the fees were significant. "She's doing so well in school, Barbara. I would hate for money to be the reason she misses this opportunity." That sentence worked exactly as Jennifer intended. I adored Emily. If my granddaughter had an opportunity to learn, I wanted her to have it. So I helped. Then came the SUV repair. Then a plumbing problem. Then a summer camp deposit. Then the furnace. Every request had a reason. Every reason sounded temporary. And almost every time, either Michael or Jennifer said some version of the same thing. "We'll straighten everything out soon." I believed them. Maybe I wanted to believe them. There is something strange about giving money to your adult children. You can know they are grown, know they earn salaries, know they have responsibilities of their own, and still see the little boy who once came running to you after skinning his knee. That was Michael to me. He was 40 years old, but part of me still remembered him at 8. So when he needed help, I helped. What I didn't do was count. I didn't keep a running total. I didn't send invoices. I didn't add interest. I certainly didn't place a dollar value on Christmas dinner, or on the hours I spent listening when Michael was stressed about work. I thought that was what family meant. But there were moments that bothered me. Small ones at first. One winter, Michael told me they were trying desperately to cut expenses. 3 weeks later, Jennifer posted photographs from a weekend resort in Virginia. There she was, in a white robe beside a fireplace, holding a glass of champagne. I stared at that photograph longer than I care to admit. Then I closed my phone. It wasn't my business, I told myself. Another time, Jennifer told me they were delaying several bills because money was extremely tight. 2 days later, she arrived at my house, carrying a designer handbag I knew cost more than my first used car. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I said nothing. George probably would have asked questions. I could almost hear him. Barbara, helping someone isn't the same as protecting them from reality. But George wasn't there. And I was afraid that if I pushed too hard, Michael would feel judged. So I chose peace. At least, I thought I was choosing peace. Looking back, I was choosing silence. And silence has a way of teaching people what you will tolerate. The requests continued. Sometimes Michael asked. Sometimes Jennifer did. Eventually, Jennifer stopped sounding embarrassed. "Barb, could you cover this for us?" Not, "Could we borrow some money?" Not, "I'm sorry to ask." Just, "Could you cover this?" The change was subtle enough that I almost missed it. Almost. One Sunday afternoon. I was standing at my kitchen counter making tea when Jennifer called. She needed help with another expense. I agreed, but after hanging up, I remained there with the kettle whistling behind me. Something felt wrong, not because of the amount, because of the expectation. For the first time, I wondered whether my generosity was still being received as generosity, or whether somewhere along the way, Michael and Jennifer had started seeing my money as something that already belonged to them. I wish I could tell you I confronted them that day. I didn't. I poured my tea. I sat beside the kitchen window. And I convinced myself once again that families go through difficult periods. What I did not know was that while I was quietly helping them through what I believed were temporary emergencies, Jennifer was beginning to keep track of something entirely different. Not the money I gave them. The things she believed I owed her. And by the time I discovered what she was doing, she had already started putting a price on almost every moment we spent together. The first time Jennifer made me feel like a burden, she did it with a smile. It happened at a neighborhood barbecue at Michael's house about 3 years after George died. Jennifer had invited several couples from their subdivision along with Michael's supervisor and his wife. Everyone stood around the patio drinking iced tea and wine while hamburgers cooked on the grill. I was helping Emily carry plates outside when one of Jennifer's friends asked how often I visited. Before I could answer, Jennifer laughed. "Oh, Barbara keeps us busy." Her friend smiled politely. Jennifer continued, "People have no idea how much time aging parents take until they have one nearby." For a moment, I honestly thought she must be talking about someone else. I was 64. I drove myself everywhere. I lived alone in a 2-story house and maintained it without assistance. I handled my own banking, grocery shopping, medical appointments, insurance, taxes, and home repairs. I walked every morning unless the weather was terrible. The only time Michael had driven me to a doctor in the previous year was after a routine eye procedure when the clinic specifically required someone else to take me home. Yet Jennifer's comment made it sound as if I depended on them every day. I waited for Michael to correct her. He was standing beside the grill. He heard every word. Instead, he gave a small laugh and turned one of the burgers. I smiled because everyone else was smiling, but the remark followed me home. After that, I began noticing other things. Sunday dinners had always been normal in our family. When George was alive, our house had been the gathering place. I cooked. George grilled. Michael and Jennifer brought dessert. No one counted hours or grocery receipts because that would have been absurd. After George died, we sometimes ate at Michael's house instead. One Sunday, Jennifer was clearing the dishes when she sighed. "I swear, hosting family every week gets expensive." I looked at the table. I had brought the roast. I had also brought a bottle of wine and the apple pie. "Would you rather I not come next Sunday?" I asked. Jennifer looked startled. "Oh, Barbara, don't be sensitive. I'm just saying groceries add up." Michael immediately changed the subject. That became his specialty. Whenever Jennifer said something uncomfortable, Michael found something else to talk about. Football, work, the weather, Emily's school, anything except what had just happened. Then there was the airport ride. I had flown to visit my sister in Florida for 4 days. My return flight landed late, and Michael offered to pick me up. I hadn't asked him. In fact, I told him I could use a car service. "Nonsense," he said. "I'll get you." 2 weeks later, Jennifer was talking about gasoline prices and said casually, "Even picking people up from the airport costs us nearly $40 now." People. I knew exactly which people she meant. Another time, I had bronchitis and stayed home for several days. Jennifer called to ask whether I needed anything. I said no. She insisted. Eventually, I told her I was nearly out of cough medicine. She picked it up on her way home from work. I thanked her and immediately reimbursed her for the medicine. Months later, I heard her tell someone she had been helping manage my medical needs. That was the phrase she used, managing my medical needs, for 1 bottle of cough medicine. I started wondering whether I was imagining the pattern. Maybe grief had made me overly sensitive. Maybe Jennifer was simply someone who complained more openly than I did. Then, Thanksgiving came. There were 11 people around Michael and Jennifer's dining table that year. Jennifer's parents were there. Her brother and his wife came with their children. Emily sat beside me, telling me excitedly about a history project. Dinner was actually pleasant, until Jennifer's brother began joking about how expensive the holidays had become. Jennifer laughed and lifted her wine glass. "Tell me about it. Between teenagers and aging parents, we're basically running a nonprofit." Several people laughed. Then she looked directly at me. "Barbara is probably our most expensive relative." The laughter died quickly. I felt heat climb into my face. Michael stared at his plate. Jennifer's mother gave her a warning look. Emily stopped eating. I could have challenged Jennifer right there. I could have asked her to explain precisely what made me so expensive. Instead, I smiled. Well, I said, I hope I'm at least worth the investment. A few people chuckled. The conversation moved on. That was how I handled discomfort in those days. I turned it into a joke. George used to tell me I had a gift for making difficult people feel comfortable. After he died, I began wondering whether that gift had become a weakness. The strangest part was that Jennifer had apparently begun recording these things. I discovered that because of Emily. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Emily came to my house to help me make chocolate chip cookies. She was 13, then tall for her age, with George's habit of becoming very quiet whenever something bothered her. We had just put the first tray into the oven when she asked me a question. "Grandma, do you pay Mom for taking care of you?" I turned around. "Taking care of me?" Emily immediately looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't have said anything. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel. "Sweetheart, you're not in trouble." "What do you mean?" She stared at the countertop. I saw Mom's spreadsheet. "What spreadsheet?" "The one about you." Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. I pulled out a chair. "Come sit with me." Emily sat across from me. She explained that Jennifer often worked on her laptop at the kitchen island. One evening, Jennifer had left a spreadsheet open while answering the phone. Emily had glanced at it. My name was at the top. Barbara Thomas, Family Care Expenses. I remember the exact words because Emily repeated them twice. "What was on it?" I asked. Emily hesitated. "Dates, money, hours. Hours for what?" She shrugged. "Like when Dad took you to the airport. When you came for dinner. When Mom brought groceries to your house." I stared at her. "She records dinner?" Emily nodded. There were categories. What kind of categories? She counted them quietly. Transportation, food, hosting, medical assistance, time. Time. That word bothered me most. How long has she been doing this? I don't know. A while. I tried to keep my expression neutral because Emily already looked guilty. "Maybe your mother is just tracking household expenses." Emily shook her head. "No, Grandma. It had your name on everything." The timer rang. Neither of us moved. Finally, I stood and removed the cookies from the oven. I told Emily not to worry. I told her she hadn't done anything wrong, and because I didn't want a 13-year-old carrying the weight of adult conflict, I changed the subject. But after she went home, I sat alone at my kitchen table for nearly an hour. I thought about every strange comment Jennifer had made. Hosting, transportation, medical assistance, expensive relative. What had seemed like thoughtless remarks suddenly looked different. They looked like labels, categories, entries. And I began to understand something that made me deeply uncomfortable. Jennifer wasn't simply complaining about helping me. She was documenting it. From that day forward, I paid closer attention. When Michael drove me somewhere, I noticed Jennifer asking how far he had gone. When I came for dinner, she occasionally asked what time I arrived. When she stopped by my house, she sometimes glanced at her phone before leaving. Small things. Things I would never have connected before Emily mentioned the spreadsheet. Then one evening, Jennifer called. We talked for perhaps 15 minutes. Nothing important. She complained about work. I listened. Before hanging up, she said something odd. "Well, that's another emotional support session for both of us." She laughed. I didn't. Months later at my birthday dinner, I would see the words, "Emotional support, 126 hours," printed on that bill. But on that evening, standing alone in my living room, with the phone still in my hand, I finally accepted what my instincts had been telling me. My daughter-in-law had started putting a price on love. What I still didn't understand was why. I would soon discover that the spreadsheet had started around the same time Jennifer became unusually interested in one particular piece of property George had left behind. A place my son had loved since childhood. My cottage. on the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake cottage was never just a piece of property to me. George bought it 34 years earlier when Michael was 7 years old, and we were still counting every dollar before payday. It was small then. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a narrow kitchen with cabinets that never quite closed properly. The porch leaned slightly toward the water, and every time a storm came through, George would stand at the window and announce that this would finally be the year we replaced it. We never did. Somehow, that crooked porch became part of what I loved most about the place. The cottage sat near the Chesapeake Bay, far enough from Annapolis to feel peaceful, but close enough that we could drive there without turning the trip into a major event. Michael spent nearly every summer there as a boy. George taught him to fish from the little dock. I taught him to clean the fish afterward, though he always tried to disappear when that part began. On warm evenings, the 3 of us would sit outside eating corn on the cob while mosquitoes attacked our ankles. We were never glamorous, but we were happy. Years later, Emily discovered the cottage in exactly the same way her father had. She loved collecting shells along the shoreline. George taught her how to cast a fishing line before she was tall enough to see over the side of the dock without standing on her toes. There was a photograph I kept on the mantel at home. George sat in an old wooden chair on the porch, Emily curled against his chest, both of them asleep. Whenever I looked at that photograph, I could still hear the water. After George died, I couldn't visit the cottage for almost a year. The memories were too strong. Eventually, though, I went back. I opened the windows, swept the porch, changed the sheets, and sat alone beside the bay until sunset. For the first time since his funeral, remembering George hurt a little less than missing him. That was why Jennifer's sudden interest in the property made me uneasy. It started casually. One Sunday afternoon, she and Michael were visiting my house when Jennifer asked, "How often do you actually use the cottage now?" I looked up from pouring coffee. "Quite a bit in the summer, but not during winter, not much." She nodded thoughtfully. "What does something like that cost to maintain?" I shrugged. "Taxes, insurance, repairs. Nothing I can't manage." Jennifer smiled. "I was just curious. I thought nothing of it." A month later, she brought it up again. This time, we were having lunch. "Waterfront property around the Chesapeake has gone crazy," she said. "Have you checked what your place is worth, no?" "You should. I'm not selling it." She laughed. "I didn't say you were." But something about the way she said it made me look at her. She immediately changed the subject. The questions continued. "Did the cottage still have a mortgage?" "No." "How much were the property taxes manageable? Would I ever consider renting it?" "Probably not." "Was it difficult maintaining 2 homes?" "Not particularly." Then, Jennifer began calling the cottage an investment. That bothered me. To me, it was the place where George had taught our son to fish. To Jennifer, it was a number. One evening, at Michael's house, she finally became more direct. We had finished dinner, and Emily had gone upstairs to study. Jennifer brought coffee into the living room and sat across from me. "You know what I've been thinking?" I smiled. "That usually means you're about to tell me." Michael chuckled nervously. Jennifer ignored him. "I think you should consider selling the cottage while the market is strong." I set my cup down. "I'm not interested in selling." "But why keep that much money tied up in a property you don't use every day?" "Because I like having it." Jennifer leaned back. "That's emotional thinking." "Yes," I said. "It is." She seemed surprised by my answer. I continued. "Some things are allowed to have emotional value." Michael shifted in his chair. "Mom, Jennifer isn't saying you have to sell." Jennifer looked at him. "I'm saying it might be smart." Then she turned back to me. "You could invest the money. You'd probably make more than the cottage cost you every year." "I have investments." "But this is different. That property is basically dead money." "Dead money." I remember those words because they offended me more than I expected. To Jennifer, every memory tied to that cottage had been reduced to an asset that wasn't earning enough. I looked toward Michael. I expected him to say something. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck. Maybe Jennifer has a point about at least getting an appraisal. I felt something small shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Disappointment. You grew up there, I said. I know. Your father loved that place. I know that too. Then why are we discussing selling it when I haven't expressed any desire to sell? Michael glanced at Jennifer. That glance told me more than his answer did. We're just talking, Mom. I let it go. But Jennifer didn't. Over the next several months, the subject surfaced again and again. Sometimes she wrapped it in concern. What if maintaining 2 houses becomes too much for you? Sometimes she presented it as financial wisdom. You could put that money somewhere useful. And sometimes she tried sentiment. Wouldn't you rather enjoy the money while you're alive? That last sentence bothered me because I was already enjoying my life. I wasn't sitting alone in a dark room waiting to die. I traveled. I gardened. I met former co-workers for lunch. I volunteered at the library twice a week, and when I wanted to, I drove to the Chesapeake cottage and watched the sun come up over the water. Then, one afternoon, Jennifer finally said what I believe she had been working toward all along. We were sitting on my back patio. Michael was there too. Jennifer had been discussing the cottage again when she sighed. Barbara eventually it's going to Michael anyway. The yard seemed to become strangely quiet. I looked at her. What is the cottage? Michael's face changed. Jennifer. But she continued. I'm just being practical. He's your only child. Someday he'll inherit it. I folded my hands in my lap. And so why not help your family now? There it was. No more discussion about maintenance. No more concern about property taxes. No more pretending this was about my financial well-being. Jennifer leaned forward. If you sold it now, Michael could receive part of his inheritance early. It could make a huge difference for us. I looked at my son. He stared toward the yard. Is that what you want? I asked him. Michael hesitated. That's not exactly how I'd put it. That wasn't my question. He finally looked at me. It would help. I felt George's absence sharply then. He would have known exactly what to say. I had to find my own words. I love you, Michael, I said. And I love Emily, but I am still alive. Michael's face flushed. Mom, nobody said I'm not finished. He stopped. My savings are mine. My house is mine. And the cottage is mine. Whatever happens after I die is something I have already planned for. But nobody receives an inheritance from me while I'm still living simply because it would make their life easier. Jennifer's expression hardened. We're not trying to take advantage of you. I didn't say you were. You're making it sound that way. No, I'm establishing a boundary. Jennifer stood abruptly. Well, I guess we know where we stand. Michael followed her toward the house. He paused beside me. Mom, she didn't mean anything bad. I looked up at him. Then why does saying no feel like I've offended her? He had no answer. After that conversation, Jennifer changed. Not dramatically. That would have been easier. Instead, her warmth disappeared 1 degree at a time. Fewer phone calls, shorter conversations, little comments about how much effort family required. More jokes about expenses, more reminders of things she had supposedly done for me. And one evening, while looking through my calendar, I noticed something that made me sit perfectly still. Emily had first mentioned Jennifer's spreadsheet only a few weeks after I refused to sell the cottage. I opened an old notebook and began comparing dates, the conversations about selling, the strange comments, the expense tracking. They lined up far too neatly. For the first time, I wondered whether Jennifer wasn't simply recording what she spent. Maybe she was building a case, not necessarily for a courtroom, for me. A way to convince me that I had taken so much from their family that I owed something in return. And suddenly, that ridiculous spreadsheet no longer seemed ridiculous at all. It seemed deliberate. What I still didn't know was just how badly Michael and Jennifer needed money. I would get my first real clue a few weeks later when my son came to my house alone, carrying a folder of papers, and asked me to sign my name. Michael came to my house on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a black leather folder. I remember the day clearly because it had been raining since breakfast. The windows were gray with water, and I had just made myself a pot of tea when I saw his car pull into the driveway. He hadn't called first. That was unusual. When I opened the door, he gave me a quick smile. "Hey, Mom. You're here early." I finished a meeting near. He stepped inside before I could ask anything else. Michael looked tired. Not the ordinary kind of tired that comes from working too many hours. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, and he kept rubbing his thumb along the edge of the folder he was carrying. I noticed that immediately. Mothers notice things, even when their children are 41 years old. "Coffee?" I asked. "No thanks." "Tea? I'm fine." He followed me into the kitchen and sat at the table where George and I had eaten breakfast for almost 4 decades. I sat across from him. "What's in the folder?" He looked down at it. "Just some paperwork." That word just made me cautious. George used to say that whenever someone told you something was just paperwork, that was precisely when you should read every page. Michael opened the folder. "There's something Jennifer and I have been working on with a financial advisor." I didn't touch the papers. What kind of financial advisor? A guy Jennifer knows through one of her business contacts. "What's his name?" Michael hesitated. "Ryan something. I can get you his card." Something tightened in my chest. "You don't know the last name of the man preparing financial documents for your mother." Michael sighed. "Mom, that's not the point." "Then what is the point?" He slid several pages toward me. "It's basically family planning." I looked at the first page. There were paragraphs of legal language boxes for initials and signature lines at the bottom. Estate planning, sort of. I put on my reading glasses. Michael leaned back. "You don't have to go through every word right now." I looked over the top of my glasses. "Yes, I do." His expression changed. Only slightly, but I saw it. "Mom, it's standard language. Then it shouldn't be difficult for me to understand." He said nothing. I began reading. At first, the document seemed ordinary enough. It referred to financial continuity, emergency authority, property management, and temporary incapacity. But the farther I read, the more uncomfortable I became. One section granted Michael authority to communicate with financial institutions if I became unable to do so. Another allowed him to manage certain assets. Then I reached a paragraph concerning real property. I read it twice, then a third time. The wording was deliberately broad. Under specific circumstances, Michael could act on my behalf concerning the sale, transfer, or management of property if I were deemed unavailable or temporarily unable to manage personal affairs. I took off my glasses. "What does unavailable mean?" Michael frowned. "What, the document?" I tapped the paragraph. "It says you may act regarding my property if I am unavailable." What exactly qualifies as unavailable? I don't know. Hospitalized, maybe? Maybe it's legal language. And who decides whether I'm unavailable? Michael rubbed his forehead. "You're overthinking this." "No, Michael. I'm reading it." He pushed his chair back slightly. "Jennifer and I are trying to make things easier for you. I didn't ask you to." That landed harder than I intended. He stared at me. I softened my voice. "Sweetheart, I appreciate concern. But I'm healthy. I manage my own affairs. Why do I suddenly need this?" You're 66. I almost laughed. Is that supposed to frighten me? That's not what I meant. Then explain what you meant. He looked toward the rain-streaked window. You live alone? Yes. You have 2 properties? Yes. You've got investments, retirement accounts, insurance. If something happened, somebody would have to deal with everything. I already have estate documents. I know. Prepared by an attorney George and I trusted. I know, Mom. Then why do I need these? He became irritated. Because circumstances change. There was something underneath his frustration. Fear. I could hear it, but I didn't yet understand what he was afraid of. I turned another page. There was no direct mention of my Chesapeake cottage, but by then, Jennifer's repeated conversations about selling it were impossible to ignore. I closed the folder. I'm not signing this. Michael stared at me as if I had misunderstood. You haven't finished reading. I've read enough to know I need my attorney to review it. That's unnecessary. That answer came too quickly. I leaned back. Why? Because it'll cost you money for no reason. I can afford an attorney. I know you can afford it. Something sharp entered his voice. The room became quiet. I studied my son. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Michael looked away. I pushed the folder back toward him. If this document is harmless, you won't mind me having it reviewed. It's not about whether I mind. Then leave me a copy. He hesitated. That hesitation frightened me more than anything written on the pages. Eventually, he said, I'll email it to you. Leave these. Jennifer needs the originals. The unsigned originals. He closed the folder. It's complicated. No, I said softly. It's becoming very simple. Michael stood. Why do you always assume Jennifer has some bad motive? I remained seated. I didn't mention Jennifer. You didn't have to. He began pacing near the kitchen counter. She's trying to help. I'm trying to help. And every time we bring up something practical, you act like we're coming after your money. I felt my pulse quicken. I didn't start these conversations about my money, Michael. His face flushed. That's not fair. Who keeps asking me to sell the cottage? He said nothing. Who suggested you receive your inheritance while I'm still alive? Still nothing. And now you've brought me a document that could potentially allow you to handle my property under circumstances I don't fully understand. Michael turned away. I felt sadness more than anger. This was my child, the boy who once slept on the floor beside my bed because he was afraid of thunderstorms, the young man who cried in my arms when George died. I didn't want to distrust him. That was what hurt. Michael, I said quietly, tell me what's happening. His shoulders dropped. For a second, I thought he might. I thought he would sit back down and finally explain why the money requests had multiplied, why Jennifer had become obsessed with the cottage, why he looked as though he hadn't slept properly in weeks. Instead, he shook his head. Nothing is happening. That isn't true. You wouldn't understand. Try me. He picked up the folder. Then just before leaving the kitchen, he stopped. His back was still turned to me. Mom, you have no idea how much pressure we're under. There it was, the first honest sentence he had spoken all afternoon. I stood. What pressure? He froze. Michael. He turned around. For one moment, I saw panic on his face. Then it disappeared behind that familiar polite smile. Forget I said anything. I'm not going to forget. It's work stuff. You just brought me legal paperwork. This isn't about work. He tightened his grip on the folder. I need to go. I followed him into the hallway. Are you in debt? He opened the front door. The rain was still falling. Goodbye, Mom. Michael. He stepped onto the porch. I'll call you. Then he left. I stood in the doorway watching his car disappear down the wet street. George had taught me 2 lessons about money. The first was never to sign something I didn't understand. The second was that when numbers stopped making sense, emotions should not prevent you from checking them. That evening, I opened the file cabinet in George's old office. For the first time, I began gathering everything: bank statements, checks, transfer confirmations, texts from Michael, messages from Jennifer asking for money. I created a folder and wrote one word across the front: family. It felt cold, almost cruel, but Jennifer had already been keeping records about me. It was time I started keeping records of my own. While searching through the cabinet, I noticed another old folder wedged behind several insurance documents. The paper had yellowed slightly. Across the tab in George's handwriting were 2 words: Frank Reynolds. I recognized the name, but at that moment I had no idea that the man behind that folder would one day walk toward my birthday table and turn Jennifer's carefully planned humiliation against her. The folder with Frank Reynolds' name stayed on my desk for almost 2 days before I opened it. I told myself I was busy. That wasn't true. The truth was that anything written in George's handwriting still had the power to stop me. Even 6 years after his death, seeing the familiar slope of his letters could bring back an entire morning in our kitchen. The newspaper folded beside his coffee, his glasses sliding down his nose the way he would tap a pen against the table when he was thinking. On Thursday evening, I finally carried the folder downstairs and placed it beside my tea. Inside were old financial statements, legal documents, several letters, and a photograph of George standing beside a man I immediately recognized: Frank Reynolds. He looked younger in the picture, maybe in his late 40s, with thick dark hair and an apron tied around his waist. Behind them was a waterfront building with a sign that read, Reynolds Chesapeake Grill. I remembered Frank, although I had not spoken to him in years. George first met him through a local business association. Frank had started the restaurant with his wife Susan in the late 1980s. It began as a modest seafood place and slowly became one of those Annapolis restaurants people return to for anniversaries, graduations, and important family dinners. George liked Frank. That mattered because George was selective about people. He pays his employees before he pays himself, George once told me. To George, that said everything. Then, a severe coastal storm damaged part of the restaurant. I remembered that much. Water flooded the storage area, equipment was ruined, and repairs took longer than anyone expected. What I had never known was how close Frank came to losing everything afterward. According to the documents in the folder, the insurance company disputed part of the claim. Repairs were delayed. Frank had suppliers demanding payment and employees depending on him for wages. The restaurant was still popular, but popularity does not help when there is no cash in the bank. That was something George understood better than most people. At the time, George was still working in corporate finance. He didn't own a bank or a venture capital firm. We were comfortable, but we were not people who casually wrote enormous checks. Still, George had money set aside from a bonus and a small investment he had sold. He loaned Frank enough to keep the restaurant operating. I stared at the figure on the original agreement. It was more than I expected. I remembered asking George during that period why he seemed unusually concerned about Frank. He had simply said, "A good business can die from bad timing." That was George. He never told a story about himself if he could avoid it. Frank repaid the money over several years. There were copies of checks in the folder. Most were accompanied by short handwritten notes. "George, another piece of what I owe you. Thank you again. Frank." Then I found a different document. Near the end of the repayment period, Frank apparently still owed George a smaller balance. Instead of taking the remaining amount in cash, George agreed to convert it into an ownership interest in a limited liability company connected to the land and building where the restaurant operated. I sat straighter. I read the agreement twice. George had not become part owner of the restaurant itself. That distinction was clear. Frank owned and controlled Reynolds' Chesapeake Grill. But years earlier, Frank had separated the restaurant business from the company that held the waterfront real estate. George's remaining investment had been converted into a small minority interest in that property company. It was exactly the kind of arrangement George would have liked. Steady, quiet, useful, no drama. I continued reading. After George died, his interest transferred to me under our estate plan. I knew there were investment distributions that appeared periodically in one of my accounts, but I had never paid much attention to their source. George had structured several investments before retirement, and after he died, my accountant handled most of the reporting. There it was, in black and white. I owned a small interest in the company that owned the property beneath Reynolds' Chesapeake Grill. Not enough to control it, not enough to interfere with Frank's business, but enough to make me part of its history. I leaned back and laughed softly. George, you really did tell me everything except the interesting parts. Then I found a letter. It was written in George's handwriting and addressed to me. Not formally. Just Barbara. My throat tightened. The note was brief. George explained that Frank had tried several times to repay the final balance in full, but George believed converting it into a property investment was better for both families. Then came the line that stayed with me. Frank is a decent man who got caught in a bad season. I hope if I'm ever gone and he calls about this arrangement, you'll treat him with the same trust I did. I had to put the letter down. George had always believed in second chances, but not foolish ones. He believed you helped people who were willing to stand back up. That distinction mattered. I sat there for a long time thinking about Michael, about Jennifer, about the black folder Michael had brought to my kitchen, about how quickly he had taken it away when I refused to sign. The contrast was painful. George had helped Frank through a crisis without demanding control over Frank's life. Michael and Jennifer seemed to be responding to their own crisis by seeking control over mine. I still didn't know how serious their financial problems were, but I was becoming certain they existed. The next morning, I called my accountant. I didn't tell him about Michael or Jennifer. I simply asked him to explain the Reynolds property investment. He confirmed everything I had read. The interest was small, but healthy. It generated quarterly distributions. My name was properly registered. There was nothing I needed to do. So, I have no management responsibility, I asked. None unless there's a major ownership vote, he said. Frank's side handles the operational matters connected to the property. And the restaurant, separate company. You have no ownership in the restaurant business itself. That relieved me. I had no desire to accidentally become a restaurant owner at 66. After the call, I put the folder away. At the time, I considered it nothing more than a meaningful piece of George's past. A reminder that my husband had once helped a friend survive a difficult chapter. I had no reason to imagine it would matter to my own family troubles. Months later, I would learn just how wrong I was. Because Jennifer, for all her spreadsheets and calculations, had made one mistake. She knew about my house. She knew about my savings. She knew about the Chesapeake cottage. But she did not know about George's connection to Frank Reynolds. She did not know that I still held an interest in the property beneath his restaurant. And she certainly did not know that one day she would choose that very restaurant as the place to publicly accuse me of owing her money. At the time, though, I had a more immediate question. How much money had I already given Michael and Jennifer? So I returned to the folder I had labeled family. I began with the most recent bank statement. Then I went backward. One transfer, then another, then another. By midnight, I had filled an entire sheet of paper with numbers. I stopped adding when the total passed $40,000. Not because I was finished, because my hands had started shaking. The next morning, I continued, and when I finally reached the true amount, I sat frozen at my desk. I had spent years believing I was helping my son through a series of temporary emergencies. The number in front of me told a very different story. It was more than $73,000. And that was when I finally understood that whatever Michael and Jennifer were hiding from me, it was much bigger than a broken furnace or an unexpected tax bill. $73,000. I stared at the number on the yellow legal pad until it stopped looking like money and started looking like evidence. $73,240. That was the total I could clearly document over a little more than 4 years. I checked it twice, then a third time. At first, I thought I must have counted something twice, so I started over with a calculator, my bank statements, old checks, and transfer confirmations spread across George's desk. The total barely changed. I sat back and covered my mouth with one hand. How had I not seen it? The answer was painfully simple. It had never been $73,000 at once. It had been $3,000 for taxes, $2,000 for a car repair, $4,000 here, $800 there, a summer program, a plumbing problem, a medical bill they claimed insurance had not covered, a furnace emergency. Every request arrived with urgency attached to it. Every request came wrapped in a story. And because I loved my son, I had treated each crisis as separate. I had never added them together. George would have. That thought hurt. He had always believed numbers told the truth long before people were ready to. I began creating categories. Some of the money had unquestionably been gifts. Birthday money for Emily, a contribution toward a family trip after George died. Christmas checks. Those didn't bother me. I had given them freely. Then there were loans Michael had promised to repay. Those were harder. I found text messages. I'll get this back to you after my quarterly bonus. Just need to get through this month, Mom. I promise this is temporary. Temporary had lasted years. Still, what troubled me most were the so-called emergencies. I started with the furnace. Jennifer had called me in January, almost 2 years earlier. She sounded panicked. Barbara, the heat is barely working. They say we may need a major repair. It was bitterly cold that week. My first thought had been Emily. Do you have heat tonight, some? But the technician says it could fail completely. How much? About $6,000. I transferred the money the next morning. Now I searched through my old messages. 3 weeks after that transfer, Jennifer had sent me a photograph from a resort in Virginia. I remembered it immediately. Snow-covered mountains, a fireplace, champagne, Jennifer in a white robe. At the time, I had told myself the trip must have been booked and paid for long before the furnace failed. Now I wasn't so sure. I wrote beside the transfer $6,000 furnace. The question mark made me feel sick. Then I found the educational payment. That one was worse. Jennifer had called me about a special summer academic program for Emily. She was accepted, Barbara. It's a wonderful opportunity. I remembered how proud I had felt. Emily had always been bright. What does it cost? $4,500. I sent it. No questions. Why would I question money intended for my granddaughter's education? But as I reviewed the transaction, something bothered me. I remembered Emily mentioning a scholarship around that same period. At first, I assumed it was for something else. Then I opened my laptop. I searched through old emails until I found the name of the program. The organization still existed. I stared at the contact number for several minutes before calling. I did not want to sound like an interfering grandmother. When a woman answered, I explained that my granddaughter had attended several years earlier and that I was organizing old family financial records. I gave Emily's name and the year. There was a pause while she checked archived information. Then she said, "Yes, I found her." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Could you tell me whether the tuition was paid privately?" Another pause. "No. She received one of our merit scholarships." I felt cold. A full scholarship. Yes, ma'am. Tuition was covered. I swallowed. Was there any remaining family balance not according to our record? I thanked her. Then I sat motionless. $4,500. Jennifer had specifically told me the money was required for tuition. It hadn't been. I wanted an innocent explanation. Maybe Jennifer had misunderstood. Maybe there were travel costs. Maybe she had intended to use the money for related expenses and simply explained it badly. But even as I searched for excuses, I knew I was doing what I had always done, protecting them from my own conclusions. That evening, I called Michael. He answered on the fourth ring. Hey, Mom, do you have a minute? Sure. I kept my voice calm. I've been organizing my financial records. Silence. Only a second, but I noticed it. Okay, I found the money I gave you and Jennifer for Emily's academic program. Another pause. What about it I called the program today? His tone changed immediately. Why would you do that? The question shocked me. Not? What did they say? Not is something wrong. Why would you do that? Because I was checking my records. Mom, that was years ago. Yes, and they told me Emily had a full scholarship. Michael said nothing. So what was the $4,500 for? He exhaled slowly. I don't remember. You asked me for it. Jennifer handled most of that stuff. Then ask Jennifer. I'm at work. Michael. His voice sharpened. Mom, I honestly don't know. I closed my eyes. Was the money used for Emily? I said I don't know. That answer broke something in me. Not because $4,500 would ruin me. It wouldn't. Dollars would. Because my son could not tell me whether money I had given for his daughter's education had ever been spent on her. Are you and Jennifer in financial trouble? I asked. He became very quiet. Why would you ask that? Because the numbers don't make sense. What numbers? The money I've given you? Here we go. His irritation appeared so quickly that I almost apologized. Almost. Michael, I'm not attacking you. It sounds like you're auditing us. That word stayed with me. Auditing. Jennifer could keep a spreadsheet about every meal she believed she served me, but my looking at $73,000 I had given them was somehow inappropriate. I'm trying to understand, I said. You're making something out of nothing. Then explain it. I have to go. He ended the call less than a minute later. I sat in George's office looking at the silent phone. The next clue came from Emily. She visited me that Saturday. We were making grilled cheese sandwiches when I asked casually whether she was excited about summer. She shrugged. I don't think we're going anywhere. Nothing planned? Num. Mom says we have to save money. I paused. Is everything all right? Emily looked toward the kitchen doorway. Then she lowered her voice. Mom and Dad fight about money all the time now. I kept my expression neutral. What kind of money? Credit cards? My stomach tightened. Anything else? She nodded reluctantly. Loans? Late payments. Mom keeps saying Dad needs to figure something out before things get worse. I put the spatula down. Do they argue in front of you? They think I can't hear them. That hurt almost as much as everything else. Emily was 16 now, old enough to understand fear, too young to be carrying her parents' financial secrets. I reached across the counter and squeezed her hand. You don't need to fix any of that. I know, but her face said otherwise. That night, I returned to my records. I stopped looking at the individual explanations. I looked at the pattern, the expensive clothes, the resort trips, the constant emergencies, the borrowed money, the missing education payment, the strange paperwork Michael wanted me to sign, Jennifer's obsession with the cottage, and the arguments Emily had overheard. For the first time, I allowed myself to say the words out loud. They're in debt. The room did not change. Nothing dramatic happened. But I did. Because once I said it, the last several years rearranged themselves in my mind. Michael and Jennifer were not experiencing a collection of unlucky financial emergencies. They were drowning. And instead of telling me how deep the water was, they had been quietly using me to stay afloat. I still didn't know how much they owed. I didn't know why Jennifer believed my cottage was the answer. And I certainly didn't know how far she was willing to go to get access to that money. But someone else did. 3 days later, Emily came to my house without calling first. She stood on my porch with tears in her eyes. "Grandma," she said, "I need to tell you something about Mom." Then she looked back toward the street as if she were afraid someone had followed her. "It's about your cottage." That was the moment I knew whatever she was about to say would change our family. Emily stood on my porch, holding the straps of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "Grandma," she said again, "I need to tell you something about Mom." I stepped aside immediately. "Come in." She glanced toward the street one more time before entering. That frightened me. Emily had always been a thoughtful girl, but she was not dramatic. If anything, she tended to minimize problems because she hated conflict. I led her into the kitchen. "Do your parents know you're here?" She shook her head. "Dad thinks I'm at Megan's house." Emily. "I know. I shouldn't lie. I'm not worried about that right now." Her eyes filled with tears. I pulled out the chair beside me. "Sit down." For a few seconds, she simply stared at her hands. Then she whispered, "I don't want you to hate Mom." That sentence told me the conversation would be worse than I expected. "I don't want to hate anyone," I said. "And nothing you tell me is going to make you responsible for how I feel." She nodded, but the tears began falling anyway. "I heard them fighting." "Your parents?" "Yes. About money." She nodded. "And the cottage." I felt my stomach tighten. "What did they say?" Emily wiped her cheeks. At first I wasn't trying to listen. I was in my room doing homework. Mom and Dad were downstairs, but they were yelling. She took a breath. "Mom said Dad needed to stop being weak and tell you the truth." "What truth? That they can't keep going like this?" I remained silent. Emily continued. "She said the credit cards are almost maxed out. She said they have loans and that Dad's been moving money around just to keep everything paid." That confirmed what I had already suspected. But then Emily said something that made the room feel colder. "Mom said it wouldn't matter if you would just sell the cottage." I looked at her carefully. "What exactly did she say?" Emily hesitated. She said, "That place is going to Michael's someday anyway. Barbara is sitting on money we need now." I felt something sharp in my chest. Not because Jennifer wanted the cottage. I already knew that, because of the way she talked about my future. As if my death were simply the date on which their financial plan would mature. Emily looked frightened by my silence. "Grandma?" "I'm all right." I wasn't, but I needed her to continue. "What did your father say?" He told her to stop talking like that. For the first time, I felt a tiny flicker of relief. Then Emily destroyed it. "He said you would never agree if you felt pressured." I stared at her. Not we shouldn't pressure her. Not it's her property. He had said I would never agree if I felt pressured. There was a difference. "What did Jennifer say?" Emily looked down. She said, "You already owed them." My hands went still. "Owed them what? For everything they've done for you." The spreadsheet. Suddenly, I knew where this was going. She started listing things Emily said. Driving you places, having you over for dinner, bringing you food, helping after Grandpa died. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "And your father?" "He said that wasn't the same as owing money." I closed my eyes for a moment. At least he had said that much. But Mom said it didn't matter. Emily's voice trembled. She said if you could see it all written down, you'd understand how much their family had sacrificed. Their family. As though I were not part of it. What did she mean by written down? Emily looked at me. The spreadsheet. I already knew the answer, but hearing it still hurt. She's been adding everything up. Yes. For how long, I don't know exactly. Emily wiped another tear away. She said she could turn it into a bill. There it was. The future birthday envelope had just taken shape before my eyes. At that point, I still didn't know the amount would be $14,860. I didn't know she would include 126 hours of emotional support. But I finally understood the purpose. Jennifer had not been keeping a household budget. She had been manufacturing a debt. Did your mother say she planned to give it to me? Emily nodded. At your birthday dinner. I felt the air leave my lungs. My birthday, she said it would be better with everyone there. Why, Emily gave me a look no 16-year-old should have understood so well. Because you wouldn't want to look selfish in front of the family. For several seconds, the only sound in my kitchen was the hum of the refrigerator. That was Jennifer's strategy. Not law. Not necessarily at first. Shame. She intended to put me at a table surrounded by relatives and present herself as the exhausted daughter-in-law who had spent years caring for an aging widow. Then I would have two choices. Pay, or refuse publicly and appear ungrateful. And the cottage, I asked. Emily took a slow breath. Mom said you wouldn't actually have to pay the bill if you agreed to sell it. I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, because the audacity was so complete that my mind struggled to absorb it. So, the bill isn't really about reimbursement. Emily shook her head. I don't think so. What does she want from the sale? She said Dad should get his share early. Early inheritance. The same phrase Jennifer had already used. I leaned back in my chair. And Michael agreed to this. Emily began crying harder. That's why I came. I reached for her hand. Tell me. He didn't at first. I waited. He told Mom it was cruel. That hurt in a different way. Because it meant he understood exactly what it was. He said you helped them when Grandpa died. He said you'd given them money. What did Jennifer say that your money didn't erase what they had done for you? I could almost hear Jennifer saying it. Calm, reasonable, as though love were an accounting system. Emily continued. They fought about it more than once. And eventually, she looked into my eyes. Dad said he wouldn't argue with her anymore. My throat tightened. That isn't quite the same as agreeing. No. She hesitated. But then Mom asked if he would stop her at the dinner. I already knew. He said no. Those 3 words hurt more than anything else Emily had told me. Michael knew. My son knew that Jennifer intended to embarrass me at my own birthday dinner. He knew the bill was built from ordinary acts of family life. I knew the goal was to pressure me into selling a place his father had loved, and he had decided he would sit there and let it happen. I stared out the kitchen window. For years, I had defended Michael in my own mind. He was stressed. He disliked confrontation. Jennifer was stronger than he was. He loved me, even if he didn't always show it well. But there comes a point when weakness becomes participation. Emily squeezed my hand. Grandma, I'm sorry. I turned back immediately. No. But I feel like I'm betraying them. You are not responsible for their choices. She's my mom. I know. I love her. You should. Emily looked surprised. I continued. You never have to stop loving your mother because she did something I disagree with. And you do not have to choose between us. But what she's doing is wrong. Yes. I didn't soften that part. Your mother is wrong. Emily nodded slowly. And your father is wrong for allowing it. Her face crumpled. I moved my chair beside hers and wrapped my arms around her. She leaned against me the way she had when she was little. I just didn't want you to walk into that restaurant without knowing. I closed my eyes. Thank you. After Emily left, I stood alone in the kitchen for a long time. My birthday dinner was 12 days away. I could cancel it. That was the obvious choice. I could call Michael and Jennifer immediately and tell them I knew everything. I could spare myself the humiliation. I picked up my phone twice. Both times, I put it back down. Because beneath all the anger and fear, one question would not leave me alone. What would Michael actually do when the moment came? It was one thing to hear through Emily that he had promised not to interfere. It was another to watch his mother being humiliated and remain silent. Part of me still wanted to believe he would stop Jennifer. That when he saw the envelope, when he heard her accuse me, when he looked into my face, some part of the son I had raised would stand up. So I made a decision I never imagined I would make. I would not cancel my birthday dinner. I would go. I would sit at that table. And I would let Jennifer believe I knew nothing. Not because I wanted revenge, because after years of excuses, loans, lies, and silence, I needed to know exactly who my son had become. And Jennifer was about to give me the answer in front of everyone. For the next 12 days, I behaved as if I knew nothing. That was harder than I expected. Michael called twice. The first time he asked whether I was still looking forward to my birthday dinner. Of course, I said. There was a short pause. Good. He sounded relieved. That hurt. The second time he asked whether I wanted him to pick me up. No, sweetheart. I'll drive myself. You sure I'm 67, Michael? I can still find a restaurant. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Jennifer sent me a cheerful text the following morning. Can't wait to celebrate you. I think you're going to remember this birthday for a long time. I stared at those words. She had no idea how true they would become. I typed back, looking forward to seeing everyone. Then I put my phone down. I had spent most of my life believing honesty meant saying everything immediately. George had been different. He believed timing mattered. Knowing something and reacting to it are two separate decisions, he used to say. For once, I understood exactly what he meant. I knew what Jennifer planned. What I did not yet know was how Michael would behave when the moment arrived. That question kept me awake more than the bill itself. I could survive Jennifer insulting me. What I wasn't sure I could survive was watching my son allow it. 3 days before the dinner, my phone rang just after lunch. The number was familiar, although I had not seen it in years. Barbara Thomas. Yes. A warm male voice said, Barbara, it's Frank Reynolds. For a second, I looked toward the folder on George's old desk. Frank, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all. We exchanged the kind of greetings people use when too many years have passed. Frank asked how I had been. I asked about his family and the restaurant. Then he explained the reason for his call. There was routine paperwork related to the property company in which I held George's old minority interest. Nothing urgent, mostly signatures connected to insurance renewal and an updated operating agreement. I normally send these through your accountant, Frank said, but one page needs direct acknowledgement from the owners. That's fine. I'll have it mailed over. Then he chuckled. And apparently, I'm going to see you before the paperwork even gets there. I frowned. You are Saturday night. I sat straighter. My birthday dinner at Reynolds Chesapeake Grill. I had not told him. Yes. Your daughter-in-law made the reservation a few weeks ago. When I saw Thomas on the private dining schedule and then heard it was Barbara Thomas's birthday, I figured it had to be you. That surprised me. Jennifer had told me Michael chose the restaurant. He had supposedly remembered that George liked the waterfront view. Now I knew that was not true. Jennifer had booked it herself. Small world, I said carefully. Frank laughed. Not that small in Annapolis. Then his voice softened. George would have loved knowing you were celebrating there. I looked toward the framed photograph of my husband on the bookshelf. He would have complained about the prices. Frank laughed loudly. That sounds more like him. For the first time in days, I genuinely smiled. We talked for another few minutes. Frank mentioned how much George's help had meant during the restaurant's difficult years. I almost told him what was happening. The words rose into my throat. Frank, my daughter-in-law may be planning to humiliate me inside your restaurant, but I stopped myself. This was still a family matter. I didn't want to recruit allies. I didn't want Frank arranging special treatment, and I certainly didn't want to create some dramatic confrontation before Jennifer revealed exactly what she had prepared. So I said nothing. Before hanging up, Frank told me, if I'm there Saturday, I'll come say hello. I'd like that. When the call ended, I remained seated with the phone in my hand. Jennifer had selected Reynolds' Chesapeake Grill herself. She couldn't possibly know about my financial connection to the property. If she did, she would never have chosen it for her performance. The irony was almost enough to make me believe George was somewhere laughing. But I didn't depend on irony. I depended on preparation. That afternoon, I returned to the folder labeled Family. I made copies of the important documents. The bank transfers, the checks, the messages in which Michael promised repayment. The record showing Emily's academic program had been covered by scholarship. The notes I had made about the furnace payment. I also included a copy of the document Michael had tried to persuade me to sign. He had eventually emailed it after I insisted. My attorney had reviewed it. His response had been simple. Do not sign. The authority it granted was broader than I needed, and my existing estate plan already covered legitimate emergencies. I placed everything into a plain blue folder. Then I put that folder inside my handbag. I wasn't planning to throw papers across a restaurant table. I wasn't planning some grand revenge. I simply refused to walk into an ambush unarmed. Saturday arrived clear and warm. I spent the morning at home. At one point, I stood in front of my closet longer than necessary. It sounds silly now, but choosing what to wear felt strangely important. I finally selected a navy blue dress George had always liked. It wasn't expensive. It fit me well. I added a pearl necklace he had given me for our 30th anniversary. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I did not see an aging widow who needed her family to manage her life. I saw Barbara Thomas, a woman who had worked for more than 30 years, a woman who had buried her husband and learned how to wake up alone, a woman who could manage 2 properties, her investments, her home, and her own future. Whatever Jennifer had written in her spreadsheet could not change those facts. Still, my hands trembled when I picked up my handbag. The blue folder inside felt heavier than paper should. At 6:15, I drove toward the waterfront. The streets grew busier as I approached downtown Annapolis. Couples walked along the sidewalks. Boats moved slowly across the water. Restaurant patios were already filling for the evening. For one strange moment, I wanted to keep driving. I could go to the cottage, turn off my phone, sit beside the Chesapeake until the whole ugly plan passed without me. But then I thought about Michael. I had excused his silence for years. I had told myself he was tired, uncomfortable, trapped between his wife and his mother. Maybe that had once been true. Now I needed to know whether discomfort had become cowardice. When I entered Reynolds' Chesapeake Grill, the hostess smiled. Mrs. Thomas, happy birthday. Thank you. Your family is already here. Of course they were. She led me toward a table near the windows overlooking the water. I saw Jennifer first. Beautiful dress, perfect hair, bright smile. She rose immediately. Barbara. She hugged me warmly enough for everyone to see. Happy birthday. Michael stood next. He kissed my cheek. Happy birthday, Mom. For half a second, his eyes met mine. Then they moved away. Emily remained seated. Her face was pale. I gave her the smallest smile I could manage. A silent promise. You did the right thing. Around us, relatives were laughing, ordering drinks, admiring the view. Nobody seemed to know why Jennifer had truly brought them there. I sat down. My handbag remained beside my chair. Inside it were 4 years of records. Across the table, Jennifer lifted her wine glass. To Barbara, she announced brightly, and to family. Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine too. Then I looked at my son. He was staring into his drink. At that moment, I knew the trap had already begun. All Jennifer had to do was wait for the birthday cake. And all I had to do was wait to see whether Michael would finally find his courage before she placed that envelope in front of me. For the first hour, Jennifer played the perfect daughter-in-law. If I had not known what Emily had told me, I might have believed her. She leaned across the table to compliment my dress. Barbara, that color looks beautiful on you. She touched my pearl necklace and smiled. Was this from George? Yes. I thought so. It's lovely. Anyone watching us would have seen affection. That was what Jennifer wanted. My sister-in-law Carol was there along with 2 cousins, Jennifer's parents, and a few other relatives who had known Michael since he was young. Jennifer had chosen her audience carefully. Enough people to create pressure. Not enough to make the dinner feel suspicious. Michael sat 2 seats away from me. He ordered bourbon before dinner, then another with his meal. Michael had never been much of a drinker. That told me almost everything I needed to know about his state of mind. Emily sat directly across from me. She barely touched her food. Every few minutes, our eyes met. I kept my expression calm for her sake. The last thing I wanted was for my granddaughter to believe she had caused what was coming. She hadn't. The adults at that table had made their own choices. Tyler, our waiter, was warm and professional. He couldn't have been much older than 27. He knew the menu well, joked gently with Carol about her indecision between crab cakes and salmon, and made sure my water glass never stayed empty for long. Nothing about him suggested he would become important to the story. That came later. During dinner, Jennifer kept the conversation cheerful. She told a story about Michael getting lost on a business trip. She praised Emily's grades. Then she raised her wine glass. I want to say something about Barbara. Everyone quieted. Jennifer looked at me with a smile so convincing that for one painful second, I remembered the woman who had brought soup after George died. She's been through so much these past few years, Jennifer said, and family has really come together around her. Around me. Not with me. Around me. The wording was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did. We've all made sacrifices, she continued, but that's what family does. Michael stared at the table. I waited. Was this the moment? No. Jennifer smiled. To Barbara. Everyone raised their glasses. To Barbara. I lifted mine too. Thank you. Then dinner continued. The tension was so intense inside me that every ordinary sound seemed amplified. Silverware against plates, ice shifting in glasses, conversation from nearby tables, the soft music playing through the dining room. I kept wondering whether Jennifer might lose her nerve. Maybe Michael had changed his mind. Maybe he had confronted her after Emily came to me. Then dessert arrived. Tyler approached carrying a small white birthday cake with blue flowers around the edge. A single candle burned in the center. Everyone began singing. I smiled. I even laughed when Carol sang badly on purpose. For 30 seconds, I allowed myself to enjoy my birthday. Then I blew out the candle. Applause went around the table. Tyler began cutting the cake, and Jennifer reached into her handbag. There it was, a cream-colored envelope, exactly as Emily had described. My stomach tightened even though I had been expecting it. Jennifer placed the envelope beside my plate. Before we get too distracted with dessert, she said, "There's something we need to take care of." The room quieted. Michael took a long drink. I looked at him. He would not meet my eyes. Jennifer pushed the envelope toward me. "Before you start making plans with your money, we need to settle what you owe this family." Carol frowned. "What does that mean?" Jennifer ignored her. I opened the envelope. Inside were several printed pages. The first page looked almost like a business invoice. At the top, Family Care Reimbursement, Barbara Thomas. Then the amount balance due, $14,860. I had prepared myself for the humiliation. I had not prepared myself for the details. Christmas dinner hosting, $425. Transportation to medical appointment, $180. Airport transportation, $95. Emergency grocery delivery, $112. Guest room preparation, $240. Holiday participation costs. Meal expenses. Travel time. Administrative assistance. Then I reached the line I would never forget. Emotional support, 126 hours, $780. I looked up. "You're charging me for conversations," Jennifer maintained a professional expression. "This isn't about individual conversations, Barbara. It's about the cumulative burden." "The burden?" Jennifer's father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Carol whispered, "Good Lord." Michael remained silent. That silence cut deeper than Jennifer's words. I placed the papers down. "Michael." He stared at his bourbon. "Look at me." Slowly, my son raised his eyes. I saw shame there, but shame without action is a very weak kind of morality. "Do you believe this?" I asked. He swallowed. "Mom, do you believe I owe you $14,860 for being part of your family?" Jennifer jumped in. "That's not what the document says." I asked my son. Michael's face reddened. Several seconds passed. He could have ended everything then. All he needed to say was no. Instead, he whispered, "Jennifer has put a lot of work into calculating the costs." I felt something inside me go very still. There was my answer. Jennifer leaned forward. "Barbara, nobody is saying we don't love you. But love doesn't make expenses disappear." I almost admired the coldness of that sentence. "Apparently love now has an hourly rate," I said. Jennifer's mouth tightened. "This is exactly why we wanted everyone here. Every time money comes up, you become emotional." Carol stared at her. "You brought us here for this." Jennifer ignored the question. "There's a reasonable solution. I already knew what was coming. Still, I let her say it. "You don't have to write us a check tonight. How generous. You could sell the cottage." The entire table went silent. Michael closed his eyes. Jennifer continued. "The property has appreciated significantly. Michael is your only son. He'll inherit it eventually. If you sell now and give him a portion of the proceeds, we can consider this account settled." There it was. The bill had never been about $14,000. It was a lever, a piece of theater designed to make the cottage seem like a reasonable compromise. Jennifer slid another page toward me. "We're trying to find something fair for everyone." "Everyone, yes. And what do I receive?" She blinked. "What? In this arrangement, you get money. Michael gets his inheritance early." "What do I receive?" Jennifer hesitated. "Peace of mind." I nearly laughed. Instead, I looked at Michael. He looked miserable, and still he said nothing. That was when Tyler returned to clear several dessert plates. He reached for the folder Jennifer had placed near the edge of the table. "Careful," Jennifer said. "We need those documents." "Of course." Tyler moved the pages aside. Then his eyes caught something near the bottom of the final sheet. He stopped. I watched his expression change. His easy smile vanished. He leaned closer. At the bottom of the document was a section I had not yet read. Hospitality verification, supplied by Reynolds Chesapeake Grill. Below it were several supposed meal cost references, followed by a signature. Tyler stared at the name, then at Jennifer, then at me. "Mrs. Thomas," he said, carefully, "did you authorize this?" Jennifer immediately straightened. "This is a private family matter." Tyler didn't move. "I understand, ma'am. I'm asking Mrs. Thomas." Jennifer reached for the document. "The verification simply supports some of the hospitality expenses. There's nothing unusual about it," but Tyler's eyes remained on the signature. Something was wrong. I could see that clearly now. "Is there a problem?" I asked. Tyler hesitated. Then professionalism seemed to take over. "I just need to check something." Jennifer gave a sharp laugh. "There's nothing to check." Tyler gathered the empty dessert plates. "I'll be right back." He walked away from our table. I watched him cross the dining room. But instead of going toward the kitchen, he turned down a hallway near the manager's office. A moment later, I saw him pull out his phone. Jennifer saw it too. For the first time that evening, real uncertainty appeared on her face. "What is he doing?" she muttered. I looked down again at the bottom of the document. The signature beneath the restaurant verification belonged to someone named Richard Coleman, general manager. I had no idea who Richard Coleman was. But judging by Tyler's reaction, something about that name was very wrong. Jennifer reached for the papers. I placed my hand on them first. "No," I said. Her eyes snapped toward mine. "I'm not finished reading my bill." Across the table, Michael looked toward the hallway where Tyler had disappeared. His face had gone pale. None of us knew exactly who Tyler was calling, but I knew one thing. For the first time since Jennifer placed that envelope beside my birthday cake, she no longer looked like the person controlling the room. And somewhere on the other end of Tyler's phone call was the man who was about to change that completely. The next 3 minutes felt longer than the entire dinner. Jennifer kept glancing toward the hallway where Tyler had disappeared. She tried to act annoyed rather than worried. "This is ridiculous," she said, reaching for her wine. "He's a waiter. He has no business interfering in a private financial discussion." Carol looked at her. "You put the restaurant's name on the document." Jennifer's jaw tightened. "It's supporting documentation, supporting what the meal expenses." Carol gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're charging Barbara for eating dinner with her own family." Jennifer ignored her. Michael had stopped drinking. He sat with both hands wrapped around his glass, staring at the table as though the wood might open and swallow him. I looked at him. "Do you know what that restaurant verification is?" His eyes lifted. "No." The answer came too quickly. Jennifer turned toward him. "Of course he doesn't. I handled the documentation." That at least sounded believable. Michael looked genuinely confused. Emily had gone completely still. I wanted to reach across the table and reassure her, but I resisted. This was not her mess to fix. A moment later, Tyler reappeared. He was not alone. The man walking beside him was tall, silver-haired, and wearing a dark navy blazer over an open-collar white shirt. I recognized him immediately. Frank Reynolds. He looked older than the photograph I had found in George's folder, of course. So did I. But his posture was the same. Straight-backed, calm, deliberate. Tyler stopped near the end of the table. Frank's eyes moved first to me, then to the papers beneath my hand. "Good evening," he said. Jennifer sat straighter. "Are you the manager?" Frank looked at her. "I'm Frank Reynolds. I own Chesapeake Grill." The expression on Jennifer's face changed instantly. Not fear. Not yet. Relief. She actually smiled. "Oh, good. Then maybe you can clear this up." Frank pulled out the empty chair beside Carol. "I hope so." Jennifer slid the document toward him before I could say anything. "There seems to be some confusion with your waiter. Those pages contain expense verification related to meals and hospitality provided over the past few years." Frank looked down at the document. "May I?" I nodded. "Please." He picked it up. Nobody at the table spoke. I watched his eyes move slowly across the page. Then he reached the final section. His expression changed. Not dramatically. That was what made it more unsettling. His face simply became very still. He read the signature. Then he looked at Tyler. "You saw this, yes, sir." Frank turned the page toward himself again. "Where did you get this document?" he asked Jennifer. Jennifer folded her hands. "It was prepared from our records." "That wasn't my question." A faint flush appeared on her neck. "I used a service to organize the supporting material." "What service? I don't remember the exact name." Frank tapped the bottom of the page. "This says Reynolds Chesapeake Grill supplied hospitality verification." Jennifer glanced around the table. "It verifies costs associated with meals." Frank shook his head. "No, it doesn't." Jennifer's smile disappeared. "What do you mean?" "I mean this restaurant did not supply this verification." She leaned forward. "Well, someone did. No one authorized to speak for my business." Frank looked at the signature again. "And this is not valid." Michael finally spoke. "What's wrong with it?" Frank turned the page so Michael could see. "The signature is attributed to Richard Coleman, general manager." "Yes," Jennifer said quickly. "Exactly." Frank looked directly at her. "Richard Coleman retired almost 5 years ago." Jennifer blinked. Nobody moved. Frank continued. "He hasn't had authority to verify anything for Reynolds Chesapeake Grill since then." Jennifer's face lost some of its color. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There is," Frank said calmly. "The misunderstanding is why my restaurant's name appears on a document we did not prepare or authorize." Jennifer reached for the page. Frank did not release it immediately. She froze. "I told you I used an online service. Then I suggest you contact that service. I will. And ask them why they used the name of my business and the name of a former employee." Jennifer gave a nervous laugh. "This is being blown completely out of proportion. It's not a legal document." That statement hung in the air. I looked at her. Not a legal document. Interesting. She had spent the last half hour presenting it as serious enough to justify taking part of my cottage. Frank finally released the page. "If it isn't a legal document," he said, "then it certainly shouldn't contain fabricated business verification." Jennifer's father stared at her. "Jennifer, did you make this?" She turned sharply. "No." "Then who did I just told you? You said you don't remember." Her mother lowered her eyes. The atmosphere at the table had completely changed. 20 minutes earlier, Jennifer had controlled every word. Now she was defending a document no one trusted. Then Frank looked at me, and his entire expression softened. "Barbara." Jennifer's head turned. Frank smiled sadly. "I'm sorry this is happening on your birthday." I gave him a small smile. "Thank you, Frank." Michael looked from Frank to me. "You two know each other?" Frank raised his eyebrows. "Your mother didn't tell you no. Your father and I were friends." Michael stared at him. My dad, George, helped me through one of the worst periods of my life. The table became quiet again. Frank rested one hand on the back of the chair. Years ago, after storm, damage, and an insurance dispute, this restaurant came very close to failing. Your father helped me bridge the gap when banks were not particularly interested in hearing explanations. I watched Michael's face change. He knew his father had helped people, but George rarely discussed details. Frank continued. I repaid most of what I owed him over time. Near the end, George converted the remaining balance into a small investment in the property company that owns this building. Jennifer stopped breathing for a second. I saw it. Frank nodded toward me. That interest passed to Barbara after George died. Jennifer stared at me. What I said, nothing. Frank clarified immediately. Barbara does not own this restaurant. I do. But she holds a minority interest in the company that owns the property beneath it. Michael looked stunned. Mom, you never told me. It never seemed important. Jennifer found her voice. You own part of this building. A small interest in the property company, I said. Her eyes moved from me to Frank and back again. I could almost see her recalculating everything she thought she knew about my finances. Frank smiled faintly. George was one of the reasons this place survived long enough for us all to be sitting here tonight. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I could almost see George at the table beside me. Then Jennifer spoke. So, what does that have to do with this? Frank's expression cooled. Nothing except that you happen to use my business's name on a document designed to pressure a woman whose late husband once helped save that business. Jennifer stiffened. That's your interpretation. No, Carol said from across the table. That's exactly what happened. Jennifer shot her a look. I remained quiet. I did not need to defend myself yet. The evening was doing that for me. Frank placed this document back in front of me. I'll have my office confirm in writing that Reynolds Chesapeake Grill did not provide this verification. Thank you. He nodded. Then he looked at Jennifer. And until I know exactly how this was created, do not use my business name on any further documents. Jennifer crossed her arms. I already said it was a mistake. Frank replied calmly. Then correcting it should be easy. He turned toward me again. Barbara, if you need anything, Tyler knows where to find me. I appreciate that. Frank began to leave. Then Michael spoke. Mr. Reynolds. Frank turned. My father really helped you that much. Frank's expression softened again. Your father helped me when I was too proud to admit how scared I was. Michael looked down. Frank added quietly, but he never made me feel small for needing help. Then he walked away. That sentence remained behind. Michael stared at the table. Jennifer stared at me, and for the first time that night, there was something close to fear in her eyes. Not because Frank knew George, not because of my small property interest, because she had just realized something far more dangerous to her plan. I was not confused. I was not helpless. And I was not nearly as financially naive as she had assumed. Still, she did not know the worst part. She did not know that inside the handbag beside my chair was a blue folder containing 4 years of transfers, checks, messages, and records, more than $73,000. I reached down and lifted the handbag onto my lap. Jennifer watched me. What are you doing? She asked. I looked directly at her. I think you're right about one thing. Her eyebrows rose. If we're going to discuss family finances in front of everyone, Jennifer, I opened my bag. Then we should discuss all of them. Jennifer's eyes stayed on my handbag as I pulled out the blue folder. For the first time all evening, she looked uncertain. Not angry, not offended, uncertain. That mattered. People like Jennifer were comfortable when they controlled the story. She had chosen the restaurant. She had invited the relatives. She had prepared the bill. She had decided when the envelope would appear and how I would be described. What she had not planned for was evidence. I placed the folder on the table. Michael looked at it and went pale. "Mom," he said quietly. "What is that?" I met his eyes. "Records." Jennifer gave a small dismissive laugh. "Of what?" "Of the money I've given you and Michael over the last 4 years." The room went silent. Jennifer folded her arms. "I don't see how that's relevant." I looked down at her invoice. "You just charged me for Christmas dinner." Carol covered her mouth. No one laughed. I opened the folder. The first page was a simple summary I had made from my bank statements. "I did what you did, Jennifer." Her eyes narrowed. I added things up. I slid the page into the center of the table. $3,000 for Michael's tax problem. Michael lowered his head. $2,400 for the SUV repair. Jennifer's father looked at her. $6,000 for the furnace. Jennifer interrupted. "That was an emergency." "Maybe." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm still not certain $6,000 went toward a furnace." Her face hardened. I continued. $4,500 for Emily's academic program. At the sound of her name, Emily looked at me. I kept my voice gentle. "This one matters." Jennifer leaned forward. "Don't drag Emily into this." I looked directly at her. "You already did." Michael closed his eyes. I removed another page from the folder. I contacted the program. Jennifer went still. They confirmed Emily received a full merit scholarship. Carol looked confused. "So, what was the $4,500 for?" Jennifer's face flushed. "There were other expenses." "Which ones? Travel, materials, things like that?" I nodded. "Then show me the receipts." She stared at me. "You're being ridiculous." "No, I'm doing exactly what you asked everyone at this table to do." I tapped her bill. "I'm keeping score." That shut her up. I turned to the next page. There were also checks for summer camp plumbing repairs insurance and several personal loans. Michael whispered, "Mom, please." I stopped. Not because he asked, because the sound of his voice hurt me. He looked broken. But I reminded myself that 20 minutes earlier he had watched Jennifer present me with a bill for loving him. So I continued. "The total I can document is $73,240. Someone at the table gasped. Jennifer's mother stared at her daughter. $73,000. Jennifer immediately shook her head. "That makes it sound like we took all of it. What would you call it? Some of that was gifts." "Yes." I nodded. Some of it was. I had expected that argument, so I separated them. I took out another sheet. Birthday gifts. Christmas gifts. Money I explicitly gave with no expectation of repayment. Those are not the issue. Michael looked up slightly. The issue is the money you asked for, under specific explanations that no longer make sense. Jennifer pushed her chair back. "This is humiliating." I almost laughed. Instead, I looked at the cream envelope beside my cake. "You invited the audience." Then I looked around the table. "I only brought the receipts." Carol let out a breath. Jennifer stared at me as if I had slapped her. "You came prepared to embarrass us." "No." I kept my voice level. "I came prepared to defend myself." "You knew Michael said it before Jennifer could." I turned to him. His expression was devastated. Knew what that Jennifer was going to do this. I looked at Emily for only a second, then back at my son. "Yes." Michael's face drained of color. Jennifer immediately looked at Emily. "You told her." Emily flinched. I spoke sharply. "Do not do that." Jennifer turned toward me. "She had no right. She is 16 years old." My voice was still quiet, but everyone at the table heard the change in it. You and Michael put her in a house where she had to listen to adults argue about taking her grandmother's property. You made her carry a secret that never should have belonged to her. Jennifer opened her mouth. I raised one hand. No, she stopped. If you are angry, that I knew be angry with me. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I continued. She came to me because she was frightened. Michael looked at his daughter. His face crumpled. Emily. She looked away. Jennifer tried again. Barbara, this doesn't change the fact that we've spent years helping you. I looked at her invoice. Helping me? Yes. Is that what you call it? You think meals are free? Gas is free. Time is free. I stared at her. Did you ever tell me dinner came with an invoice? She said nothing. When you brought me groceries after George died, did you tell me there would be a service charge 6 years later? That's not what this is. When Michael called me every morning after his father died, was that emotional support for me or for him? Michael's eyes filled with tears. Jennifer looked away. I pulled her invoice closer. Christmas dinner hosting, $425. I read the line aloud. That year, I brought the roast wine and dessert. Carol muttered, I remember that. Jennifer's face reddened. Airport transportation, $95. I looked at Michael. You offered to pick me up. He nodded slowly. I know. Medical transportation, $180. I continued. One ride after an eye procedure, because the clinic would not allow me to drive. Nobody spoke. Then I reached the line that had hurt the most. Emotional support, 126 hours. I let the words sit there. Then I looked at Jennifer. You counted conversations. She shifted in her chair. You're twisting it. No. I shook my head. I'm finally seeing it clearly. My voice trembled despite my effort to control it. When George died, I thought you came to my house because you loved me. Jennifer looked uncomfortable. I thought you brought food because I was family. I turned toward Michael. I thought you called every morning because you had lost your father too. Michael wiped his eyes. I did, Mom. Then why is any of it on a bill? He couldn't answer. That was when I knew the confrontation was no longer about Jennifer. Not really. She had created the scheme. But Michael had allowed it to reach this table. I gathered the pages into a neat stack. There is something else you both need to understand. Jennifer watched me cautiously. I know why this bill exists. Her expression changed. I continued. I know about the credit cards. Michael looked up sharply. I know about the loans. Jennifer's face went blank. I know you have been arguing about money. Barbara. And I know you believe my cottage is the solution. Jennifer's mother whispered. Oh my God. I kept my eyes on Jennifer. You never wanted $14,860. She said nothing. You wanted leverage. That's ridiculous. No. I tapped the page where she had written her proposed settlement. You wanted me embarrassed enough to sell the cottage and give Michael part of what you call his early inheritance. Michael covered his face with both hands. Jennifer stood. This conversation is over. No. My voice stopped her. You brought this conversation to my birthday dinner. She stared at me. So, we are going to finish it. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then I turned toward my son. Michael. He lowered his hands. I had never seen him look so ashamed. There is only one thing I still don't know. His lips parted. I pushed Jennifer's bill toward him. I know she created this. I paused. I know she planned to humiliate me. My throat tightened. But I need to hear the truth from you. Jennifer immediately said, Michael, you don't have to. Yes, I said. He does. My son looked at his wife, then at Emily, then finally at me, and for the first time that night, he did not look away. His eyes filled with tears. Mom, he whispered. I knew about all of it. The words hurt even though I had expected them. Then he took a trembling breath. And there's more you don't know. I knew about all of it. Michael's words seemed to silence not only our table, but the entire restaurant around me. Of course, people were still talking. Glasses were still clinking. Somewhere near the bar, someone laughed. But at our table, nothing moved. I looked at my son. Tell me. Jennifer stood beside her chair. Michael, this is not the place. He turned toward her. That's what you said about every place. Her face hardened. What is that supposed to mean? It means I'm done pretending. I had never heard Michael speak to her that way. Not angrily, just exhausted. He looked at me again. The debt started with Jennifer's business. Jennifer immediately shook her head. Don't make this all about me. I'm not. Michael wiped his face with both hands. I was there too. I signed things. I borrowed money. I lied. Then he began explaining. 3 years earlier, Jennifer had decided to turn her interest in interior design into a serious business. At first, it had sounded reasonable. She had always been good with colors, fabrics, furniture, and presentation. Friends regularly asked for her advice. She rented a small studio, bought samples, ordered expensive furniture and decor pieces she believed she could resell to clients. Paid for professional photography, advertising, a new website. Then more advertising. She thought the clients would come, Michael said. Jennifer crossed her arms. They were coming. Not enough. You said you believed in it. I did. His voice cracked. That was the problem. I kept believing one more month would fix everything. The business lost money. At first, they covered the losses from savings. Then credit cards. Then another credit card. Jennifer told Michael they needed to maintain a certain image because wealthy clients would not hire a designer who appeared unsuccessful. So they kept the SUV, the clothes, the dinners, the vacations, the photographs online. They preserved the appearance of prosperity while their finances collapsed behind it. Michael spoke quietly. When the first cards filled up, I moved balances. Then we took out a personal loan. How much, I asked. He looked ashamed. 25,000. Jennifer looked away. And after that, a home equity line. My chest tightened. You borrowed against your house. He nodded. And there were other cards. Carol whispered, Michael. He continued before anyone could interrupt. I thought my annual bonus would help. Then it was smaller than expected. We started using one account to cover another. That was why the emergencies never ended. The tax problem, the car, the furnace. Every request had been another bucket of water thrown into a sinking boat. I looked at Jennifer. And the money for Emily's program. Michael closed his eyes. Jennifer spoke first. We needed it. That wasn't my question. Her mouth tightened. Michael answered. It went toward a credit card payment. Emily's face fell. I felt anger rise through me. You used your daughter's education to get money from me, Jennifer snapped. She had a scholarship. She didn't lose anything. I stared at her. That does not make the lie smaller. Michael nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. Jennifer turned on him. Stop agreeing with everything she says. Michael looked at his wife. Why? Because for once, she's right. Jennifer recoiled. The marriage I had spent years tiptoeing around was cracking open in front of everyone. But I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. "Tell me about the cottage," I said. Michael's face changed again. He looked toward the windows where the dark water reflected the restaurant lights. Jennifer started talking about it when things got really bad. "I talked about reality," Jennifer said. Michael ignored her. "She figured the cottage had appreciated enough that if you sold it and gave us part of the proceeds, we could clear most of the high-interest debt. And I told her you wouldn't sell." "That is not what I asked." He lowered his head. "I wanted the money too." That answer hurt, but at least it was honest. "I hated myself for wanting it," he continued. "But every month I was watching everything get worse," Jennifer said sharply. "We were trying to save our family." Michael looked at her. "No, we were trying to save our lifestyle." She went silent. That may have been the first truly cruel thing he had said all evening. Cruel because it was true. Michael turned back to me. "When you refused the early inheritance idea, Jennifer started saying, we needed to show you how much we'd done for you." "The spreadsheet." He nodded. "I told her it was ridiculous. But you didn't stop her." "No." "Did you know she was turning it into a bill, yes?" The answer came out barely above a whisper. Emily began crying quietly. Michael saw her. His face crumpled. "Sweetheart." She shook her head. "Don't." That single word from his daughter seemed to destroy him. He looked back at me. "Mom, I knew she was going to give you the bill tonight." I already knew. Still hearing him say it made my throat burn. I told myself she just wanted to make a point. I told myself once you saw the numbers we'd talk privately. "You knew she invited relatives." "Yes." "You knew she wanted witnesses." "Yes." "You knew she planned to connect that bill to selling my cottage." His eyes filled again. "Yes." I sat very still. For 6 years, I had defended Michael to myself. He wasn't dishonest. He was overwhelmed. He wasn't cruel. He avoided conflict. He wasn't using me. I was desperate. There comes a moment when explanations stop being excuses. I found mine at that table. "I could forgive you for being broke," I said. Michael's chin trembled. "I could forgive you for making terrible financial decisions. I could even forgive you for being ashamed to tell me." I paused. "But I don't know how quickly I can forgive you for sitting there while someone humiliated your mother." He closed his eyes. "I know." "No, Michael, I don't think you do." My voice broke for the first time. "I buried your father." He began crying openly. "I spent months learning how to sleep in our house alone." "I know. You called me every morning." He nodded. "I thought those calls were love." "They were." "Then you sat here tonight while your wife charged me for needing that love." Michael covered his mouth. Jennifer interrupted. "That isn't fair. Michael lost his father too." I turned toward her. "Exactly." She stopped. "Those conversations were not services you provided to me. They were grief we shared as a family." No one spoke. Then Michael looked at Emily. "I'm sorry." Emily wiped her face. "For what?" "For making you hear things you never should have heard." He took a shaky breath. "For making you afraid that telling Grandma the truth meant betraying us."
Emily said nothing. Michael continued, "You didn't betray anybody." "I did." Jennifer stared at him. "That's enough." "No." Michael shook his head.
"It isn't." He looked at me again. "I brought you those papers to sign because I thought if something happened, if we had authority, it might make things easier later." My chest tightened. Later, when the cottage eventually became mine. The honesty of it was almost unbearable. He rubbed both hands over his face. I knew how ugly that sounded. That's why I couldn't explain it. Jennifer muttered. We were thinking ahead. I looked at her. You were spending ahead. She flushed. You don't understand what it feels like to watch everything you built collapse. No, I said. But I understand what fear feels like. I thought of George. Fear does not give you permission to steal someone else's choices. Jennifer looked away. Michael nodded. She's right. Jennifer laughed bitterly. Of course she is. Everyone here has decided I'm the villain. I answered quietly. You created the bill? Yes. You used my granddaughter's education as an excuse for money. Jennifer said nothing. You pushed my son to treat my property as his future rescue plan. Still nothing. That does not mean Michael is innocent. I turned toward him. And I will not make him innocent just because you behaved worse. Michael looked almost relieved to hear it. Perhaps because accountability was finally cleaner than excuses. The shame had exhausted him. I don't expect you to forgive me tonight, he said. Good. He nodded. I don't deserve that. I looked at my son for a long time, then at Jennifer, then at Emily. Something inside me had changed. For years, I had believed keeping this family together meant smoothing every argument, writing every check, and making sure nobody became uncomfortable. That version of me was gone. I closed the blue folder. There will be no more money. Michael looked at me. Jennifer's head snapped around. What no more loans? I placed my hand over Jennifer's $14,860 bill. No early inheritance. Her face tightened. And the cottage is not for sale, Barbara, no. The word came easily this time. Maybe because I should have used it years earlier. You wanted it to know where we stand. I looked directly at both of them. Now you do? And for the first time since George died, protecting my family no longer meant protecting them from consequences. It meant protecting myself from becoming the thing they expected me to be, their solution. For a few seconds after I said the cottage was not for sale, no one moved. Jennifer stared at me as though I had just closed the last door in a burning building. Maybe to her I had. She leaned forward. Barbara, you're making a decision based on anger. No, I said. I'm making a decision I should have made years ago. You know what happens if you cut us off. I looked at her carefully. That phrase told me everything. Cut us off, not stop helping, not stop lending us money. Somewhere along the way, my generosity had become part of their expected income. I know exactly what happens, I said. You and Michael will have to deal with the debt you created. Jennifer looked at Michael. Are you going to let her talk to us like this? Michael did not answer immediately. His face was swollen from crying, his shoulders slumped. Then he said, She's right. Jennifer stared at him. What? We have to deal with it. She pushed her chair back. So, that's it. After everything we've done, I almost reached for the bill again. Instead, I left it where it was. I am not paying $14,860, I said. Jennifer laughed bitterly. Nobody expects you to write a check tonight. I am not paying it tonight, tomorrow, next month, or ever. Her mouth tightened. And I am not selling the cottage. Michael nodded slowly. I understand. No early inheritance, I continued. Jennifer opened her mouth. I did not let her interrupt. No more emergency transfers. No more loans arranged through a phone call. No more money because a furnace supposedly broke or a bill suddenly appeared. Mom, I turned to Michael. If there is ever a legitimate financial reason for us to do business again, it will be written down. His expression tightened, but he nodded. Written agreement. Clear purpose. Clear repayment schedule. All right. And you will never bring me another document involving my property unless my own attorney reviews it first. Michael looked down. I won't. I believed that he meant it in that moment. Whether I could trust him to mean it 6 months later was another matter. That was the difference I was finally learning. Love could exist immediately. Trust had to be earned. Jennifer stood. This is unbelievable. Her mother spoke softly. Jennifer, sit down. No. She grabbed her handbag. I'm not going to sit here while everyone acts like I'm some criminal. Frank had never called her one. Neither had I. But guilt has a strange way of supplying its own vocabulary. You brought a fabricated restaurant verification into Frank's business, Carol said. What did you expect? Jennifer spun toward her. Stay out of it. You invited me. That stopped Jennifer for half a second. She had invited everyone. That truth kept returning. Every witness she had chosen to strengthen her case had become a witness to its collapse. Jennifer turned toward Michael. Are you coming? Michael looked up. There it was. Another choice. A smaller one than the others, perhaps, but I knew what it meant. For years, whenever Jennifer became angry, Michael followed. If she left a family gathering, he left. If she ended a conversation, he helped end it. He had spent a long time calling that loyalty. Sometimes it was simply avoidance. Michael, Jennifer said again. He looked at Emily first, then at me. Finally, he said, Not yet. Jennifer's face changed. What did you say I said not yet? You're choosing her. Michael shook his head. No, I'm staying to finish what I helped start. For the first time that night, I saw something in him that reminded me of George. Not strength exactly, the beginning of it. Jennifer stared at him for several seconds. Then she laughed once sharply. Fine. She turned and walked away. Her heels struck the floor in quick, angry steps. Her mother started to stand, then stopped. Nobody followed Jennifer. I watched her disappear through the restaurant entrance. I did not feel victorious. I thought I might. Instead, I felt an enormous sadness. Once Jennifer had brought soup to my house and hugged me while I cried over George, somewhere between that woman and the woman who left my birthday. Dinner, resentment, fear, money, and entitlement had twisted something that might once have been genuine. Michael sat silently. After a moment, I said, I still love you. He looked at me. Those words seemed to hurt him. I know, but I do not trust you. He nodded. I know that too. I don't know how long it will take. I'm not going to ask you. That mattered. No bargaining. No promise that everything would change by Monday. Just consequences. Emily reached for her father's hand. Michael looked at her as if he wasn't sure he deserved it. She let him hold it anyway. A few minutes later, Frank returned. He did not ask where Jennifer had gone. I spoke with my office manager, he said. We'll document what happened tonight. I nodded. Frank continued. Barbara, because the restaurant's name and a former manager's identity were used, I need to formally address it. Michael looked worried. Are you calling the police? Frank shook his head. I haven't made that decision, and I'm not interested in turning this dining room into a courtroom. He looked at me. At minimum, Jennifer will receive written notice that she is not authorized to use Reynolds Chesapeake Grill, our employees' names, signatures, or records in any private financial materials. Thank you. If there's further misuse, I'll take whatever steps are necessary. I understood. Frank, I don't want this night to become uglier than it already is. It doesn't have to. I'm not asking you to ignore what happened. I know. I just don't want revenge. Frank studied me for a moment. Then he smiled faintly. George would understand that. I looked down. He'd probably tell me I waited too long to say no. Frank chuckled. That sounds like George, too. The tension finally eased for people to breathe normally. Carol came around the table and hugged me. Jennifer's parents quietly apologized. I told them they were not responsible for their daughter's choices. I meant it. Eventually, Tyler approached with the check folder. Mrs. Thomas, I reached for my purse. Frank immediately took the folder from Tyler. No. I looked at him. Frank, absolutely not. It's handled. You are not paying for this entire table. I didn't say I was. He smiled. Everyone else can pay their share. Your dinner is mine. That is unnecessary. So was what George did for me. My throat tightened. Frank. He pulled out the chair Jennifer had abandoned and sat for a moment. When the restaurant was in trouble, your husband gave me something more valuable than money. A loan. Loan a second chance. He looked toward the dark water beyond the windows, and he gave it without making me feel like a failure. Then he looked back at me. So let an old friend buy you dinner on your birthday. I finally smiled. All right, good, but I'm leaving the tip. Tyler laughed from beside us. Frank raised both hands. I know better than to argue with Barbara Thomas twice. That was the first moment all evening when I truly laughed. Not because anything had been fixed. It hadn't. My son had betrayed my trust. My daughter-in-law had tried to turn love into debt. My granddaughter had been pulled into secrets she never should have carried. But as I left Reynolds' Chesapeake Grill that night, I understood something I hadn't understood when I walked in. Justice did not always look like revenge. Sometimes it looked like a woman carrying her own handbag, walking to her own car, driving back to a home she still controlled. Sometimes it sounded like one simple word. No. No to the bill. No to the cottage sale. No to being treated like an inheritance that had started paying out early. Michael walked me to my car. At the door, he stopped. I'm sorry, Mom. I know. Can I call you tomorrow? I looked at him. Give me a few days. His eyes filled again. All right. He did not argue. That was the first consequence he accepted. I drove home alone, and for once, being alone did not feel like abandonment. It felt like peace. I did not know whether Michael and I would ever return to what we had been. Perhaps we shouldn't. Some relationships cannot be repaired by returning to the past. They have to become something new. And over the next year, my son would have to decide whether he was willing to do the slow, uncomfortable work of becoming someone I could trust again. 1 year after my 67th birthday, I was standing in the kitchen of the Chesapeake cottage cutting tomatoes for Sunday dinner. The porch had finally been repaired. George would have been disappointed. For 30 years he had claimed that crooked porch had character. I had decided character was overrated when one of the boards nearly gave way beneath my foot. The new porch was sturdy, clean, and wide enough for 2 rocking chairs facing the water. I spent more time at the cottage now than I had in years. Something about surviving that birthday dinner had changed my relationship with the place. I no longer looked at it only as something George had left behind. It was mine too, my decision, my future, and I had kept it. A car door closed outside. I glanced at the clock. Michael was early. That had become one of his new habits. He no longer made promises about changing. He simply did small things consistently. That difference mattered. The year after my birthday had not been easy. Michael and Jennifer tried marriage counseling for several months. I stayed out of it. Whenever Michael wanted to tell me every detail, I stopped him. She is still Emily's mother, I reminded him. I know. And I'm not going to become the person you used to build a case against your wife. Eventually, the marriage ended anyway. Not dramatically. There was no single screaming argument, no spectacular discovery. They simply reached a point where counseling could no longer disguise how much resentment had accumulated between them. Jennifer believed Michael had betrayed her at the restaurant by confessing. Michael believed Jennifer still blamed everyone except herself for their financial collapse. They separated 9 months after my birthday. Michael moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment. He sold the SUV, canceled memberships, stopped buying things because he wanted other people to think he was successful. The first time I visited his apartment, I noticed a folding table serving as his dining table. He looked embarrassed. "Furniture isn't exactly the priority right now." I smiled. "Your father and I ate dinner on moving boxes for our first month of marriage." That was all I said. I did not offer to buy him furniture. That was part of my change, too. Michael began making payments on the loans he had borrowed from me. At first, he wanted to repay everything. "All $73,000, he said. "No." He looked confused. "I owe you, not all of it." I had spent hours separating genuine gifts from actual loans. Christmas checks were gifts. Birthday money was a gift. Money I had knowingly given for family trips was a gift. I would not rewrite history simply because Jennifer had tried to do it to me. But loans were different. "If you told me you would repay it, I said then you will." Michael nodded. "I understand. It isn't because I need the money." "I know. It's because you need to keep your word." He never missed a payment after that. Some months, the amount was small. I didn't care. Accountability mattered more than speed. Emily changed too. The tension she had carried began slowly disappearing. She spent time with both parents. Jennifer remained her mother, and I made one rule very clear. Emily was not allowed to use my house as a place to attack Jennifer. If she was hurt, she could talk. If she was confused, I would listen. But I would not teach my granddaughter that loving me required hating her mother. People are more complicated than the worst thing they have ever done. I believed that even about Jennifer. Forgiveness did not require inviting her back into my financial life. It simply meant I did not want bitterness becoming another inheritance. Michael's relationship with me was slower to heal. For months, he did not have a key to the cottage. He noticed. He never asked. That mattered more than if he had apologized 100 times. Once in early spring, he arrived while I was still driving from Annapolis. He waited 40 minutes on the porch, rather than calling to ask where I kept the spare key. When I arrived, he was sitting on the steps drinking coffee. "You could have called." He shrugged. "It's your house." 3 simple words. A year earlier, he had been discussing my property as though it already belonged to him. Now he understood. It was my house. That was when trust began returning. Not all at once. Trust rarely returns with a speech. It returns in moments nobody applauds. A payment made when no one is watching. A boundary respected without complaint. An apology that does not demand forgiveness. A son waiting on a porch instead of assuming he still has a key. That Sunday, almost exactly 1 year after the birthday dinner, I finally invited Michael and Emily to the cottage for dinner. Emily arrived first. She ran through the front door and hugged me. "Grandma, the porch looks amazing. Don't let your grandfather hear you say that." She laughed. 5 minutes later, Michael walked in carrying 2 grocery bags. "What's all that?" I asked. "Steaks, potatoes, salad stuff, and dessert." "I already bought groceries." "Too late." He placed the bags on the kitchen counter. Then he pulled a receipt from his pocket. For one strange second, all 3 of us stared at it. Michael looked at me. I looked at him. Emily covered her mouth. Michael slowly raised the receipt. "This says you owe me $87.43. I narrowed my eyes. He managed to keep a straight face for 2 seconds. Then he tore the receipt in half. "Dinner's on me, Mom. No invoices." Emily burst out laughing. So did I. Not polite laughter. Not the kind I had used for years to smooth over discomfort. Real laughter. I laughed until tears came into my eyes. Michael started laughing too. And somehow that ridiculous receipt broke the last piece of tension sitting between us. Later after dinner, Emily went inside to wash dishes. Michael and I sat on the new porch watching the Chesapeake turn gold beneath the setting sun. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Michael said, "I need to apologize again." "You've apologized many times. Not for the right thing." I looked at him. He stared toward the water. "I spent months thinking the worst thing I did was take money from you." He shook his head. "It wasn't." "No, it was sitting there." My throat tightened. "At the restaurant?" "Yes." He finally looked at me. "I knew what Jennifer was going to do, and I sat there hoping you would just give in so I wouldn't have to deal with my own problems." His eyes filled. "I let you be humiliated because I was scared. I didn't rescue him from the sentence. He needed to finish it." "I'm sorry, Mom." I reached over and placed my hand on his. "I forgive you." He closed his eyes. "But listen to me." He nodded. "Forgiveness does not mean that night disappeared. I know. It doesn't mean I trust you exactly as I did before. I know that too. It means I no longer need that night to punish either one of us." Michael squeezed my hand. "That's enough." Behind us, Emily called from the kitchen. "Are you two going to help or just sit out there being emotional?" Michael laughed. "Coming." I watched him stand and walk inside. Through the cottage window, I saw my son drying dishes while Emily washed them. For years, I believed protecting family meant preventing discomfort, paying the bill, giving the loan, avoiding the argument, saying yes because no might disappoint someone. I had been wrong. Sometimes love means allowing people to face consequences. Sometimes the kindest thing you can say is no. The cottage stayed mine. But the real thing I had recovered was not a house. It was my right to decide what happened to my own life. And as the sun disappeared over the Chesapeake, I finally understood that setting a boundary had not destroyed my family. It had given the relationships worth saving a chance to become honest. For most of my life, I believed generosity was one of the purest ways to show love. I still believe that, but generosity without boundaries can slowly turn into permission. Permission for someone to expect what was once freely given. Permission to confuse kindness with obligation. Permission to treat your savings, your property, and even your time as though they already belong to them. Growing older does not mean surrendering your right to make decisions. Being a mother does not mean your adult children are entitled to the life you spent decades building. And an inheritance is not money your children are waiting to collect while you are still alive. Michael's financial problems explained why he became frightened. They did not excuse what he did. That distinction saved our relationship. If I had pretended he was innocent simply because Jennifer created the scheme, nothing would have changed. Sometimes, betrayal comes from the person attacking you. Sometimes it comes from the person sitting beside them saying nothing. I eventually forgave my son, but forgiveness was not the same as restoring trust overnight. Trust returned through behavior, through payments made, boundaries respected, difficult truths accepted, promises kept when nobody was watching. And that may be the most important lesson I carried away from that birthday dinner. You do not have to become cruel to stop someone from mistreating you. You do not have to seek revenge to reclaim your dignity. Sometimes, justice is simply refusing to continue participating in your own exploitation. Sometimes, love sounds like, "I care about you, but I will not rescue you from the consequences of your choices." And sometimes, the word no is not the end of a family. It is the beginning of a healthier one. If you had been sitting at that birthday table, what would you have done when Jennifer handed you that $14,860 bill? Would you have forgiven Michael after he admitted he knew everything, and after a year of proving himself Would you have trusted him with the key to the cottage again? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would genuinely love to know how you see it, and tell me where you're watching from as well. If this story about family betrayal, boundaries, dignity, forgiveness, and second chances stayed with you, please like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. Sometimes the hardest